For a very long time, San Francisco was struggling with the geography. That San Francisco was on one edge of the bay, and a lot of the agriculture and land and everything else on the other side of the bay was relevant. They wanted to get the materials, they wanted to get the people back and forth. And in 1820, they started a ferry system where they would basically take a big flat boat and load vehicles onto the boat and then bring them across the bay. And that was their entire system. Was they got better at scheduling the ferries, but they didn't get any other technology for like the next 100 years. And in the early 1900s, they started talking about what they could do to fix this problem. They decided they might build a bridge, but that bridge was going to be super duper expensive, and they could not figure out how to build a cheaper bridge. And they ran a contest where they asked engineers to plan a bridge. And a young man named Joseph Strauss, who was a kind of upcoming engineer, proposed a different kind of bridge, a suspension bridge. Because until then, people had been thinking basically that they would have to support all the way across the bay. And what he suggested is a suspension bridge that has two giant piers coming up on either side, with giant cables that attach to those where the bay is relatively shallow. And that would save a lot of money. And they accepted his proposal. His proposal came in at about 20%, about 1/5 of the amount of money that the other bridge designs were going to take. They accepted the bridge design and they started construction in 1933. And the construction ended ahead of schedule, and it ended a little bit under budget. And they did a great job of prioritizing the safety of the workers on the Golden Gate Bridge compared to a lot of other major construction projects. So they built these giant nets underneath the bridge that could kind of move along as people were working underneath them, so that if they fell while they were working, they could be saved. And that almost worked out. Only one of the 13 people that fell off of the bridge passed away during the construction, except that they had a big beam fall, and that beam had 10 people on it, and it was heavy enough that it broke through the net. So they did lose 11 people in total during the construction, which sounds like a lot, but on these big construction projects, construction workers working on these kind of projects are working in very high risk situations. A lot of bridges have a higher construction worker toll, especially back when we're talking about. On 1937, May 27th, they opened the bridge to pedestrian traffic, and pedestrians were able to cross, and then they opened it as a toll road for vehicles a week later. When they opened it for vehicles, it was a big enough deal in the United States that the president, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, on the other end of the country, had a big button that he pushed. And it was just for show, but the big button was to show that he was actually part of starting the vehicles on the bridge. And he set the bridge vehicles off, and from that point forward, they were able to get back and forth across the bay. And people now regularly, that bridge is going nonstop all the time, getting people back and forth. Often I pick topics that are relevant to current events. I think, oh yeah, that tickles my brain because there's something similar happening in the world today. But the current event that is happening right now is so local that I want to make sure I explain it. And that is that we live in Springfield, Missouri, and in 1902 in Springfield, Missouri, a pedestrian footbridge was built. Springfield is a railroad town. There's these big tracks, and we live on one side of the railroad tracks, and Grandma and Grandpa and all of my favorite coffee shops and farmers markets live on the other side of that railroad track, which means that we have to walk about 3/4 of a mile to get to the coffee shop that is, as the crow flies, 3 blocks from here. That is because the railroad tracks go in between us and Commercial Street. In 1902, they built a pedestrian footbridge in Springfield, Missouri that goes over 13 sets of railroad tracks to connect this part of Springfield to North Springfield at the time, the Commercial Street District. And for 100 years, everybody walking back and forth would use this footbridge. And cars became more common and fewer people needed to walk, but it was still, it's an important link between this whole community we live in, and it's what keeps us from being a food desert, right? Because the shops and groceries and everything are over on that side. And in about eight years ago, maybe, they discovered that the bridge had rust spots on it, and they shut down the bridge. And we can't use the pedestrian bridge, so we have to walk, 6-8 blocks down and go underneath a very dark, stinky underpass, pedestrian footbridge underpass, and then walk all the way back up. And this summer is when they're supposed to take down the bridge and redo it completely. They're going to dig out under the piers and rebuild the bridge and put it back up. Sometime, I think by like this winter, they're supposed to be doing that. They're supposed to be taking down the bridge sometime in the next month or two. And it's going to be a big, expensive project. It's going to cost, today dollars, it's going to cost a third of what the Golden Gate Bridge cost back in the day. It's going to cost $13 million, and the Golden Gate Bridge cost like $37 million, I think, to build. But that was, $1937. And they're going to put it back up. And then every single time that we want to go get a cup of coffee, we can walk the footbridge instead of walking all the way down and around. It will make it much more accessible for us to get to the farmer's market and the coffee, and make it easier, although distance-wise almost the same, to walk to Grandma and Grandpa's. In 1937, in early May, the Hindenburg exploded above New Jersey. And a few weeks ago, I published a short video that talked about how there were swastikas on the side of the Hindenburg, and this was like, this complicated moment in our understanding what was happening and how the United States would interact with Germany. And the comment section was very clearly like, you don't know how linear time works. 1937 was before the war. It was just a flag. Nobody cared. And on May 27th of 1937, the same year, 3 weeks later, the Golden Gate Bridge opened. And the Mayor Rossi, created this thing where there was going to be a fiesta that was always capitalized. That's its own. And this Fiesta of Nations, they encouraged every world nation to send their flag to hang them along this walkway. And all the nations of the world were invited. And Nazi Germany sent their Nazi flag. And 3 weeks after, the Hindenburg exploded above New Jersey. It was so controversial that the Nazi flag be included in this, that some of the worker groups that were supporting the opening of the bridge literally said, if the Nazi flags are hanging with the other flags, we won't participate. And the day before, 7 men climbed up and tore down the Nazi flags and removed them. It was a controversial enough thing that they tore down and stole these flags that the mayor had to apologize to Germany publicly, and this was all covered in the New York Times. This is all in the New York Times on May 27th, May 28th, May 29th. There are major articles about the way that the Nazi flags were removed, the controversy surrounding it, and whether this was acceptable, right? With no mention in the articles of what was happening in Nazi Germany, because it was known, because there were other articles, because everybody knew that this was a problem happening and unfolding by 1937. So, just so you know, the Golden Gate Bridge opening was like literally overshadowed on a national news level by the fact that people were fighting about the Nazi flag being part of the opening ceremony. 100,000 people walked across the bridge on the first day, and the Nazi flags caused chaos, is the article in the New York Times the next day.